We're going to do a little project that'll allow us to experiment with getting used to using labels and buttons. Where I'm going to call this project My Buttons, because I'm always having people trying to push my buttons. So we're going to choose a view-based application. For your product on this, it can either be an iPhone or an iPad. Everything works exactly the same. The only difference is you've got a little bit more screen real estate to work with on the iPad. So I'm going to go ahead and create this as an iPad application, but it would work exactly the same for an iPhone or iPod Touch application. So I'll select that, and we're going to give it its name, and we're ready to go now. So I'm open in Xcode, and I'm going to make this a little bit larger here to work with. First thing we need to do is get our model all created. So I'm going to go into my buttons viewcontroller.h file and tell it what I'm going to be creating. So one of the first things I'm going to do is in my interface section, I'm going to have UI label. You can see you do have an autocomplete on this, and create the variable to store my information in called my text. There we go. And the next thing I need to do is create a property for this my text. So I'm going to say at property retain non-atomic, and I'll explain all of these in just a few seconds. IB outlet UI label star my text. And then the last thing I'm going to do is create the action. So minus sign IB action button pressed colon parenthesis ID sender. And that should set up my header file just fine. Now what did we just do, you might be wondering? Well, in Objective-C, we've got accessors and mutators, also known as getters and setters in C++, Java, other programming languages. So with our property statement here, the property retain atomic, we have just told the system, or told the compiler, to go ahead and create my set and my get inside the system. Basically, we've set up gets and sets without having to actually code them. The keyword retain tells the compiler to store or retain any messages about this object. It's going to allow us to store variable data inside this information without having to create extra variables. And then non-atomic tells the processor that it doesn't have to worry about dealing with the overhead for multi-threaded application. Now, programming with OS4, obviously we might be concerned about that, but for this particular application, I don't really think we need multi-threaded application. And then lastly, the keyword ID. This is a data type, and it's used generically to pass objects from one location to another within our code. You're going to be using this a lot inside the application. Okay, let's go over to the .m file, mybuttonsviewcontroller.m, and we're going to add a little bit of code to this portion of the program. So at synthesis, my text, and apparently I didn't save this. I'm going to go back to the header file, hit Command S to save it, and then go on to the M. Okay. So now I've got synthesize my text, and then I'm going to set up my methods for handling the button press. So I'm going to put a minus sign, colon IB action, button press. And then that it needs to receive information from the sender. And we're going to just set up a couple of variables to store the information so that we can pass it back fairly easily. So NSString star title, which basically just told the system to create a string called title and set it equal to the information from the sender. And we're going to passing it the state information. And we'll set the UI control state to normal, and I'll describe what we're doing here in just a few minutes. First, let's get the code on there. And we'll create another NS string for allocating our information, and we're going to do a little formatting on it. So we're going to initialize this string with format, and then we'll give it the format structure. So at quotation mark % at button pressed comma title. My text dot text equals new text. And then we're going to release new text. Okay, and that's that little piece of code. Now, what we just did for this particular line of code was that first of all we did our synthesis. The synthesis goes through and tells the compiler to automatically create our accessor and mutator, or get and set, for the my text. Then with the button press method, it's called if either one of our buttons is going to be pressed. The sender information that we have in here, sender, will point to whichever button has been pressed. It's going to say either left or right based upon the label that we're going to create in just a few seconds. Then our new string title is set equal to that information from the sender, and it's looks for the title of the name of the button that was pressed. And then new text is initialized with a format, and it's going to include the title from the variable right here, and then add the word button pressed. And then last thing we do is we set my text dot text equal to this new text that we just created. Last thing we do, new text is released. So we're doing our own garbage collection here. One or two little more things to do to this set of code. I'm going to scroll down a little bit to we're going to scroll down to deallocate, and right before our super deallocate, we're going to release my text. And that should have our program ready to go. Now you might be thinking, hey, couldn't I have done my coding for the method that I just created a little cleaner without so many variables? Yes, I could have, but use multiple variables here to try and make this a little bit easier to understand for passing of our information and the formatting of it.